Hey everybody, welcome to Improv FAQ. I'm James Quesada, and in this episode, we're going to talk about game of the scene. Game of the scene is just as nebulous as anything else in improv, and my goal here is to demystify game of the scene, make it a little bit more accessible, and try to help you benefit from the idea of game while avoiding some common pitfalls and negative mindsets that can sometimes come along with studying and practicing game of the scene. You might get everything you need from this video, but if not, I hope it'll point you in the right direction to learn as much about it as you please. Also, as a heads up, you should know that we're going to be talking about game of the scene in context of long-form improv. There's a whole nother application for the word game in short-form improv, also known as improv games. Just another fine example of the ways that improvisers like to bog ourselves down with convoluted vocab. If you need help distinguishing between those two, you can check out my video defining and comparing short and long form improv. What is game of the scene? In the simplest terms, game of the scene is the idea that you're playing around with in the scene. It's what you're having fun with in a scene. In essence, it's what makes the scene fun or funny. And it could really be as simple as that. If you feel like you've done an improv scene that was fun and afterward you could have a conversation about what you liked about it and what made it so fun, then really you know everything you need to know about game of the scene. There's no wrong answer about what made something fun for you. The only right answer is your answer. Where things get kind of complicated is when we make it our goal to consistently have as much fun as possible from scene to scene, from show to show, and from scene partner to scene partner. And at that point, it becomes helpful to take a look at what sorts of things are happening on a regular basis when we're having fun in a scene. And also when we're not having fun in a scene, what's happening there and what's missing. One of, if not the most common philosophies on game of the scene comes from Upright Citizens Brigade, or UCB, in their Comedy Improvisation Manual. They provide a very detailed analysis of game of the scene, which has become a very popular and successful approach to game of the scene in improv. But I'll also point out that the very first thing they say in the introduction of this book is that they're dealing specifically with comedic long-form improvisation as it is taught and performed at UCB theaters and training centers. Game of the scene was not invented by UCB, nor did they ever make that claim. It's a pretty common concept across many improv theaters and schools. And even then, game of the scene is not something that was created by the improv world. Game has origins that stretch pretty far back to things like clown and commedia dell'arte, and point being, it's not a new thing. As with many things that are popular and successful, there's a side effect of some people treating the text as gospel, instead of just one of many successful approaches to an art form. This book is an incredibly valuable look at game of the scene and long-form improv. But we're going to talk about game of the scene in some more liberal terms to hopefully not get stuck in one school of thought. Let's start by taking a look at game and scene separately. Here's the best way I can describe game in its purity. My brother has this dog, and her name is Ava. And if you take Ava out to the backyard or to a dog park, she'll do this thing that a lot of dogs do, which is to just charge around in circles as fast as she can. Now, when it's time to put Ava's leash on and go back inside, she likes to play a little game. You'll call her over and she'll come to you, but the moment you move toward her to put her leash on, she'll take off at a sprint and start doing laps around the yard again. And eventually she'll stop some distance away, and you'll think, okay, if she's not going to come to me, I'll go to her. And you'll start walking toward her real casual with her leash in hand. And when you get about 6 feet away, you stop. You start slowly taking steps toward her while she has this look on her face like... And then as soon as you are within reach of grabbing her collar, she'll take off running again. And she'll do this cycle like 5 or 6 times before she's done playing her game and ready to go inside. She's doing the same thing for the same reason on purpose, and she's having fun with it. That's what makes it a game. Now, in order for Ava's behavior to be a game, she doesn't have to describe what she's doing or explain what makes it fun for her, and neither do you. Finding ways to play and make games for ourselves is just something that people and animals do. But if Ava ever wants to play games that are also fun for other people, she's going to have to take a couple improv classes. Now let's talk about scenes. There are many elements that might exist in a scene: characters, actions, emotion, location, dialogue, relationships, story. In improv, you might also include the players who are playing the characters and anything the rest of your ensemble might be adding, like narration or scene painting or being a lamp. Ava's game exists without a scene and outside of the context of theater. For Ava to play her game, she's using what she has at her disposal: her ability to run real fast, the space of the yard, the path along the fence and through the bushes, and me, her nemesis. When we play Game of the Scene, we are also using what we have at our disposal, which is the scene. Depending on what you have in your scene, your game might include any combination of characters, actions, emotion, location, dialogue, relationship, story, and the stuff that you and your ensemble are doing as players in the scene. That's enough of the abstract. Let's get to some examples. I'm going to give 3 examples for good measure because I want to demonstrate the relationship between game and the available elements of a scene. The first example is a good old-fashioned chair game. Right at the top of a scene, my scene partner, Pete, tossed me a chair, and I caught it, and I tossed it back to him, and he caught it. Pete picked up a second chair and tossed both chairs to me, and I caught them both at the same time. And then I passed him one of the chairs back, and I was like, eh? And we tossed our chairs to each other at the same time, and we both caught them. And then Pete picked up a second chair, and then I picked up a second chair, and we were both like, ooh, can we do it? Can we toss both chairs at the same time and have 4 chairs in the air and then catch them? And we geared up for it, and we were like, no, let's quit while we're ahead. This seems dangerous, and we're lucky to have gotten this far without breaking anything. And the scene was over. And really, there wasn't much of a scene to speak of, but the game was very clear. We were going to toss these chairs back and forth and see if we could catch them. No explanation of who these characters were or where they are or why they're doing what they're doing. For all intents and purposes, we were just 2 improvisers on an improv stage throwing improv chairs back and forth during an improv scene because it just felt like the right thing to do in the moment. And that's all we needed. Strong game of the barely a scene. Example number 2, I started a scene by sort of shouting at my scene partner, Chris, "Hey, Ray!" talking loudly as if I needed to shout over loud music. And Chris goes, "Oh, hey, I'm at this party too." And I said, "Long time no see. What have you been up to?" And Chris goes, "Oh, I was in a horrible accident." And then I said, "Oh, cool. What kind of company?" And then from there, it was a very simple, fun game of Chris telling me about his horrible accident and me mishearing him and responding with normal chit-chat. And there's a little bit more scene context here. We know we're at a party, we know each other, but we haven't seen each other in a long time. But we don't really know much beyond that. We never found out what kind of party we were at or how exactly we know each other or what room we were in and things like that. We were able to have plenty of fun without those details. Example number 3, my scene partner Julia started a scene by saying we were expecting 1,500 people over for brunch. And I said I was very happy we were taking a stand against going out for brunch by having people come to us instead. We established that we were best friend roommates in a New York apartment. We made a game out of going back and forth between being really anxious and then really proud that we were going to be running a boozy brunch cafe out of our apartment. We also made games out of demonizing corporate brunch culture, revealing ways that we modified our little New York apartment to serve brunch, and introducing all these things that we had to buy from Costco to feed 1,500 people. We had a clear setting, clear characters with dynamic emotions, a clear relationship, a strong perspective and reason why we were doing the things that we were doing. And we had layers of games that played with all of these things. Now, for me personally, I can't say that any one of these scenes was more or less fun for me to be in. They were all fun. And as far as I remember, they all seemed to go over just as well with the audience. Does that suggest that the strength of a game is more important than the strength of the scene? Maybe. It depends on what kind of player you are and what kind of goals you have for your show. One thing I know for sure is that my enjoyment of those scenes and those games had nothing to do with whether or not I could describe what I was doing or explain why it was fun for me. So then, what is the value of studying game of the scene? Well, if you're having trouble finding and sustaining fun in your scenes, or if you're having a hard time connecting with other people about what you're playing with in a scene, studying game of the scene is a great way to train your instincts. If you're a great actor and you can build a believable world, no problem, but your scenes aren't as playful or comedic as you want them to be, studying game of the scene could be your answer. And if you're gonna study game of the scene, I'll encourage you to do so with these things in mind. Number one, we tend to talk about game of the scene in terms of finding the game of the scene, when it's really not so much about finding as it is choosing the game. The finding part is about being open to where your fun compass is telling you to go. Once you're drawn to something in a scene, you can choose to pursue it or not. Secondly, same deal with calling it the game of the scene or finding the game. There are many possible games that you might play in a scene using any combination of the elements in the scene. And just like in my third scene example, you might have layers of games kind of stacked on top of each other. There is no one right game that you're supposed to be playing. 3, generally a game is played with your scene partner. You can have individual character games for sure, but a game of the scene includes other players in the scene. 4, game is not something that happens instead of character or relationship or scene work. Game is how you use those things. And I want to emphasize this because people sometimes get into camps of game versus scene work. And while those are two separate things, if you're doing good, fun scenes, then game and scene work are always happening together. The more detailed and nuanced your scenes are, the more detailed and nuanced that your games can be too. Now, again, this doesn't mean that you have to be able to describe or explain games in order to play them. It just means that some people are going to talk about what they're doing in terms of game, and other people are going to talk about what they're doing in terms of the scene, even if they're doing the same thing. That's it for this episode. I was hoping to talk about things like heightening and other concepts related to actually playing the game of the scene, but really I could dedicate entire episodes to those things, so I might as well do that. If you found this video helpful, go ahead and hit the like button. Also, if you're new to the channel, subscribe, hit the notification bell, all that stuff. Leave a comment if you have follow-up questions about Game of the Scene, or if you have suggestions for other questions that you want to have answered on Improv FAQ.